So I think the setting for these types of talks and these types of discussions, inshallah, maybe I can just go to the setting, inshallah, that we're going to attempt to do, and it's an attempt, inshallah, it works out. Hopefully that the format will not be a format of lecture, but more a format of providing a little bit of substance and content. And then hopefully we spend as much time discussing that content as delivering it. So the point is not just that it's a one-way kind of information dump, more of a hopefully enough substance so that we can interact about it and have a little bit of a discussion afterwards. Personally, I'm a lot more interested in that than the monologue part. And because this is a first one, so I'm trying to keep the topic a little bit lighter, and then inshallah, based on the feedback that we get, we'll decide to keep adjusting it in the future if there's a future. So the idea was that we would try to present something that, inshallah, would be relevant to the majority of you. We are in a university setting where, inshallah, the majority of you are somewhere in your academic journey, at the beginning, at the end, or somewhere in between. So we're trying to keep that as the main theme, as the main topic. So we can, in one way, consider today's discussion, inshallah, to be a standalone, and if there are future topics, they can also be treated as standalones. But what we're trying to do, if this continues in the future, so from time to time to continue on with this topic, inshallah, is simply to build on a theme. So we'll start with something and we'll keep building on it. And the theme that we're proposing is to try to delve into the topic of knowledge and reason in our religion. So the importance and the place of knowledge and reason, or critical thinking, or critical judgment, this faculty that we all have, and where is its place in our religion? What does our religion say about it? And inshallah, for today's topic, we'll make the topic a little bit more relevant, a little bit more clear, because at face value it may be something that seems to be very straightforward, very simple, but we'll try to see where the issue might be in today's world. So if we were to continue with this, then the subsequent topics or the subsequent discussions that would follow from this same line of thinking. So the next one would be, maybe it's easier if I stand in one of the polite brothers here. So maybe if we continue with the importance of knowledge and the importance of reason and critical thinking, the next topic would be, what am I supposed to study? And one way to translate that question, so inshallah we'll address that maybe in the future, but just to give you the general theme of where this could go, what is considered Islamic knowledge? So these questions can actually translate into each other, especially for those of you who are either studying religion, or who aspire to study religion, or who are studying, let's say, any academic field. What is considered Islamic knowledge? What is Islamic knowledge? Are they only the classical fields of Islamic sciences as they are taught in an Islamic school? Or is there another way to understand what Islamic knowledge is? Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. From there, we can go, so once I've acquired the knowledge, and once I understand what the place of knowledge and critical thinking is within that religion, so what does it mean concretely for me? Now I understand its importance. What's the practical application for this? And one of the big themes that we can decide to spend a little bit of time on or a lot of time on would be the responsibility that comes once you carry that knowledge. So what does that responsibility look like? What's now your duty once you carry knowledge? Once you carry Islamic knowledge in the way we would define it here. And then finally, the link between knowledge and spirituality. So here we were looking at subject matter, what is Islamic knowledge. Here we would be looking more as an attitude. The link between spirituality, you actually experience something, and knowledge. And this is where we would talk about what in our religion we refer to as transformational knowledge. versus simply an accumulation of data and information, something that transforms you. So this could be one proposed way in which we could address this theme in a little bit more detail, depending on how much time we have, how much interest, on the feedback we get, and if you think that this is actually a relevant topic for you. And here, just a quick mention, because we're in a university setting. The university setting usually is one where you are told from the beginning you're supposed to get two things from university setting. You're supposed to, first of all, get a number of data or a set of information or a type of knowledge that you're supposed to be able to carry with you for the rest of your life, one thing, and hopefully you can do something with it. So that's the knowledge part. And the second thing that they're supposed to give you, they're supposed to try to teach you in university, is how to think. And how to think critically, how to use your judgment, how to use your critical mind. What we're trying to do is specifically to look at those two themes or those two dimensions. So we are in an academic setting, so hopefully you see the link between the place of knowledge and the place of reason within religion, and you have your academic background in mind. So this is where the link that we want to build on. There is today in society a popular belief that once you embark on a religious journey, if you are a religious person, if you have faith, then you are someone who has basically parked their mind. You accept all sorts of things just because. There's a holy book somewhere that might say something. It might be filled with myths, legends, weird stories, miracles that defy the laws of nature and science, and so on and so forth. And therefore, you're not really using your critical thinking. You're not using what you know from the laws of nature. You're not really using your knowledge and your reason when you accept this kind of worldview, a religious worldview with a God in it, a religious worldview where there might be angels, or there might be heaven, or there might be hell, and so on and so forth, the supernatural. This is kind of a popular belief that the majority of the people, once you're in the religion, you may kind of ignore it. But the truth is that this is a growing belief in society, and it's always gaining more and more popularity. Here are two actually popular quotes about religion. If you were to Google quotes about religion, you might get these two. So the quotes are popular, and the author of those quotes is popular. I'll read them quickly. The first one says, religious fanatics want people to switch off their own minds, ignore the evidence, and blindly follow a holy book. Second quote, faith is the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. Faith is belief in spite of, or even perhaps because of, the lack of evidence. So basically, if you have belief, if you have faith, then there is no foundation for it. You blindly follow something that is said to you because it's called, for instance, a holy book, or it's called a religion. These two popular quotes, I don't know if any of you have encountered them or not specifically. The author of these two quotes, as we said, is a popular man by the name of Richard Dawkins. Very well known and a very vocal advocate against religion and religious thought in general. And very influential in society. So people who have, generally speaking, a leaning towards scientific thinking, rationality, evidence-based conclusions and whatnot, they might be influenced by a thought like this, and this will become a kind of blockage, a psychological blockage that will prevent them from ever looking into religion in the first place. If this is how you think religion is in the first place, you're never going to go and try to see what is actually being said in that holy book or in that religion. And unfortunately, this is something that is sometimes corroborated by certain religions and certain people who are considered religious. And this happens in other religions, and it happens within our religion too. And some of the manifestations of this is that sometimes you have a religious question, you're wondering about something you've heard about religion, and you are told you can't ask that. You're not supposed to ask these types of questions. This is kind of a blasphemy. You have to accept that and take it for granted. The Quran says, that's it. The Shaykh says, that's it. And so this is what we want to actually look at today. Where is the role of knowledge? What type of knowledge is it supposed to be? What is the role of reason? What is the role of critical thinking in our religion? Are you allowed to question? Are you allowed to wonder? Are you supposed to accept things at face value, or do you have to go deeper? That's what we're going to try to see. And the truth is, this is a very, very big topic, and we don't have time to get into a lot of details, so we're going to skim the surface, and as I said, hopefully, based on the feedback we get, we'll decide how much time to spend on each dimension, each angle. Two quick quotes. I'm not going to, maybe I can read it quickly. This is an example taken from the Old Testament, where there is here, right from the beginning of the Old Testament, which constitutes the basis for Judaic thought and Christian thought. Right from the beginning, from the first book, from Genesis, we are told this about knowledge. So in the first quote, Genesis chapter 2, and the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. For in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. Now, I'm not going to spend any time commenting on why would God tell the man that if he eats from it, you're going to die, and then he doesn't actually die. Let's put that aside for a second. Here, there is a clear command, a clear order from God, not to eat from this tree, and it is referred to explicitly as the tree of knowledge. Let's look at the second quote. Now the serpent, so this is obviously the same story, it continues a little bit further. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which God had made, and he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden. And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, which was a tree of knowledge, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest you die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely, for God doth know that in the day that ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, so knowledge, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat, and the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together, and made themselves aprons. In addition to what is clearly and explicitly mentioned in the first part, which is the tree of knowledge is forbidden. The forbidden tree is actually the tree of knowledge. What we have here is an indication of what is called the fall of man. Why did the human being fall? What is the original sin? There's all sorts of interpretations that have been given and that can be given, but the bottom line is clearly associated with knowledge. The human being got too curious, and he tasted from the forbidden fruit, which is the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And when we look at this, not to justify, not to excuse what someone like Richard Dawkins is saying, but at least it gives us an idea what he might be reacting to. He's not saying something out of the head. If the only religion that he knows, the only theological system that he knows presents the place of knowledge in this manner, and says that the reason the human being fell and the thing that was most forbidden to the human being in the first place was knowledge, then you can understand why he said what he said here. When he said that people who believe in this type of ideology, of course, are going to be asked to park their mind and to accept whatever is given to them. And this is something that we know for sure exists in certain theologies, including the Christian theology, where entire books have been written about the fact that if you question, the more you question, the more this is equivalent to not having faith. Having faith means you accept it without questioning. Having faith means you do not have this objection and this constant struggle internally, intellectually. What does it mean? Does it work or not? Is it logical or not? Okay? Keeping all of this in mind, now we want to contrast this with what our religion says, with what Islam says. As we said, huge topic. We don't have time to cover a lot. If we wanted to cover this properly, we would have to go back to the scriptures so that we don't give our own theories about this. And to go back to the scriptures, we would first of all go to the Holy Quran, from beginning to end, take out all the verses of the Quran that have any mention of knowledge, of critical thinking and reason and so on and so forth, and see what it says. And if we put them together, then we may have a coherent story. And if we want it to be more complete and exhaustive, then we would go back to the hadith, we would go to the narrations of the Holy Prophet, of the Imams, and we would look at what they say, and then we would have, if not thousands, hundreds of narrations related to this topic. So we're going to put the hadith aside for now and concentrate on the Holy Quran. This is my quick exploration of the verses of the Quran that I'm presenting here. There are about 50 verses of the Holy Quran that explicitly encourage human beings, and Muslims specifically, those who follow the Quran, to think, to reflect, to have a deeper understanding of things. About 50 verses. There are about 100 verses that emphasize on the role of knowledge in Islam. So we're now at about 150 verses of the Quran that would require tafsir, and that would require discussion and meditation. And then there are another between 400 and 500 verses of the Quran that refer specifically to the notion of ayah, the notion of a sign. One way we understand ayah is simply to say it's a part of a surah, it's part of a chapter, it's a verse. That's one possible way of understanding what a verse is. Another way to understand it is to go back to how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses it in the Holy Quran. Allah says He uses the same term when He's talking about His miracles, the things that He has created, which in other words we call miracles. When He says, I have sent Musa, Prophet Musa, with miracles, He says, I have sent him with 9 ayat. So to us, in our terminology, and the way we understand the world, these are miracles. They break away with the natural order of things. The cane that becomes a serpent completely breaks away with what we know to be the laws of nature. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the same term when He talks about the heavens, or the sun, or earth, or water, or the mosquito, or the so on and so forth. So all the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is falling under the same notion. It's all, to the same extent, a miracle. Which means that it's a call to come meditate on it. It's an invitation to study it. Why would Allah put these miracles in place? And the reason we refer to them as signs, because a sign is always pointing towards something. So everything that has been created becomes basically an arrow pointing back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why they're signs, that's why they're miracles. When you see a book is a sign of its author. It's pointing back to the author. The verses of the Quran are also referred to as signs. Each verse of the Quran presents it as a miracle. Each verse on its own is a miracle, which means that it's coming with a call, an invitation to be studied. You cannot just take it at face value. If you put all of these together, you have about 500 plus verses explicitly talking about the role of knowledge, the role of reason in our religion. This is high level. So I thought I'd make it a little bit more applicable and a little bit more concrete, and we'll go faster from here on. So I took some of these verses, not all, and we put them into categories. So what we're going to present are 8 different buckets, 8 different categories in which we can put the verses that have to do with knowledge and critical thinking of the Quran. Category 1. The verses of the Quran that refer to thinking and reflection in general. Let's take the first verse, or a couple of verses. And your Lord inspired the bee, saying, make your home in the mountains and on the trees, and that which they erect, so everything that human beings build. Then eat from every kind of fruit and follow meekly or gently the ways of your Lord. There issues from its belly a juice, the honey, of diverse hues in which there is a cure for the people. There is indeed a sign in that for a people who reflect. This is not for fun. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not created the bee in this manner with the capacity to create honey in vain. This is a sign for a people who reflect. We can take that as general. Next verse. Indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth and the alternation of night and day, there are signs for those who possess intellect. So if you don't see it as a sign, the Holy Quran is saying you do not possess intellect. You're missing the point. Those who remember Allah standing, sitting, and lying on their sides, and who reflect on the creation of the heavens and the earth, saying, O Lord, you have not created all of this in vain. So this is, at the high level, the general encouragement to reflect. Whatever you're going through, whatever you observe, whatever you experience, be of those people who possess intellect and who reflect. Category 1. Second category, knowledge in general. So the first one had to do with your ability to use your judgment, your critical thinking. Here it's you're being encouraged, you're being commanded to go acquire the knowledge. Say, are those who know equal to those who do not know? And it should go without saying, but this is a pretty strong reminder. Only those who possess intellect take admonition, or will actually do something about it. Third category. The many verses of the Holy Quran that talk about the different aspects, dimensions, entities, and nature. And we could take these and put them in each one of them. We can take the verses referring to geology and put them together, the verses referring to meteorology and put them together, verses talking about biology and put them together, astronomy, and so on and so forth. We just lumped them all together here. We have 4 verses, 4 groups. Did we not make the earth a resting cradle, and the mountains as pegs, and create you in pairs, and make your sleep a rest, and make the night a covering, and make the day for livelihood, and build above you the 7 mighty firmaments, and make the sun a radiant lamp, and send down water pouring from the rain clouds, that with it we may bring forth grains and plants, and dense and luxuriant gardens. On its own surface, it looks like it's just an observation and a description of what's going on in nature. But isn't there a call in each one of this to look further into it? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying this is not on its own. Have we not made it in this way? Are you missing the point, or do you see that this is a sign? Right? This is what the verses are saying. He brings forth the living from the dead, and brings forth the dead from the living. And he revives the earth after its death. Likewise, you too shall be raised from the dead. Here the verse is a lot more explicit. When the verse is only talking about water coming from the sky, it doesn't make the association for you. It leaves it up to you and your intellect, your reasoning, to say, why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking about this? The beginning of this second group of these verses, He brings forth the living from the dead and brings forth the dead from the living. If you take it at face value, if you watch The Lion King, this is the circle of life. There's nothing special here. No. And so if you link it with there too, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the rain, which comes down, and everything is dead. And then you see what happens after the rain has come down, and suddenly everything is back to life. And maybe we don't see it in countries like Canada, but you certainly see it in countries that have only 2 seasons. The dry season and the rainy season, where you see it go completely from death to complete full of life. This is where it becomes a lot clearer. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, if you would see it when it's dry, you would never think that this is going to ever come back to life. And if you see it when it's full of life, you're never going to think that it's going to go back to being completely dead. And yet it happens, and it happens in front of you on a daily basis. Same thing with day and night. Same thing with everything you notice. So if this is all happening, why would it be so difficult for God to bring you back from the dead? And to imagine that there might be an afterlife in which everything we're describing to you, as incredible as it may seem now, why would it be so unlikely to accept for the afterlife? Right? That's the idea. Likewise, you too shall be raised from the dead, among His signs. And so here, is it really just a description of the signs, or is it a call to reflect and to study? And can you do it without having knowledge about each one of these things? And among His signs is that He created you from dust. Then behold, you are humans scattering far and wide. And of His signs is that He created for you mates from your own selves, that you may take comfort in them. And He ordained affection and mercy between you. There are indeed signs in that for a people who reflect. Among His signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth and the difference of your languages and colors. There are indeed signs in that for those who know. And of His signs is your sleep by night, and by day your pursuit of His grace. There are indeed signs in that for a people who listen. And of His signs is that He shows you the lightning, arousing fear and hope. Because if you live in a dry place and you hear the lightning, you know that it may rain, and finally your crops will grow, arousing fear and hope. And He sends down water from the sky, and with it revives the earth after its death. There are indeed signs in that for people who apply reason. And if you do not, there are no signs for you. You think that this is all at face value, just nature happening, and there's no point. Do they not observe the camel to see how she has been created, and the sky how it has been raised, and the mountains how they have been planted, and the earth how it has been surfaced? Or not alike are the 2 seas, this one sweet and agreeable, pleasant to drink, and that one salty and bitter, and from each you eat fresh meat, and obtain ornaments which you wear. And you see the ships plowing through them, that you may seek His grace, and so that you may give thanks. He makes the night pass into the day, and makes the day pass into the night, and He has made subjected, it's basically subjected to you, human beings, the sun and the moon, each moving along its course towards a specified term, that is Allah your Lord. So these are, generally speaking, all sorts of verses of the Quran that are a call to learn and to apply reason. Another field that the Quran emphasizes on, study of history. Have they not seen how many a generation, sorry about the typo, how many a generation we have destroyed before them, whom we had granted power in the land in respects that we did not grant you? And we sent them abundant rains for them from the sky, and we sent abundant rains for them from the sky, and made streams run for them. Then we destroyed them for their sins, and brought forth another generation after them. If you do not study history, you don't really understand what this means. You need to study history, really understand the might of previous civilizations. What could have possibly gone on for a civilization of that magnitude, of that power, to be non-existent generations later? Have they not traveled in the land so that they may observe how was the fate of those who were before them? They were more powerful than them. And they plowed the earth and developed it more than they have developed it. So now the Holy Quran is talking about the people of the time of the Prophet. It says, the people around you who consider themselves who are too arrogant to believe, those who were before them were a lot more powerful. We gave them a lot more might and a lot more power. And they developed the land. They build pyramids and they build all sorts of architecture, which is a lot mightier than what the disbelieving Arabs in the time of the Holy Prophet could ever do. Their messengers brought them clear proofs, so it was not Allah who wronged them, but it was they who used to wrong themselves. A call to study another field, which is history. Now, we looked at a few fields that the Holy Quran is asking us to, encouraging us to study, to use, to acquire knowledge, and to apply reason. Now we're going to look at the other side. Here's what the Quran is saying, don't do. Is our religion going to accept a kind of superficial belief that is kind of half and half, not really sure, not really certain? Is that sufficient to be considered a believer, or do you need a lot more? This is what the Quran says about conjecture. Conjecture basically means what? Basically means believing in something without having certainty, without having 100% assurance that this is the truth. You have doubts about it. If you obey most of those on the earth, they will lead you astray from the way of Allah. They follow nothing but conjectures and they do nothing but surmise. Another verse. Verily to Allah belongs whoever is in the heavens and whoever is on earth. And what do they pursue? Those who invoke partners besides Allah, they merely follow conjectures, and they just make surmise. The last verse, they do not have any knowledge of that. They follow nothing but conjecture. If your level of doubt, your probability of doubt is too high, the Quran says it's not knowledge. They do not have any knowledge of that. They have conjecture. They make up stuff, and they want to create an entire belief system around those things that they have created, without resting them on an actual solid foundation. So this is, please keep this in mind, when the quote was saying, those who believe, they believe without having any evidence. Does the Quran accept that or not? And indeed, conjecture is no substitute for the truth. There is the truth, there is knowledge, and then there is the rest, full of probability and doubt. The sixth category. What does the Quran say about actually blindly following whatever you happen to fall into? Whatever culture, whatever society, whatever norms, whatever diktats, whatever your parents teach you, and so on and so forth. What does the Quran say about that? This may seem like a cliche, but please keep in mind the overall theme. When they are told, follow what Allah has sent down, they say we will rather follow what we have found our ancestors or our parents or our forefathers followed. What even if their ancestors neither applied any reason, nor were they guided? So, keep going fast. How does the Quran say that one is supposed to exercise their humanity? What does it mean? If you look at someone, what does it mean that they are human? What are they doing? What they are doing is that they're using the faculties that God gave them in the way they're supposed to be used. Otherwise, you sink. You lose your status of being a human. Here are examples. Do you suppose that most of them listen or apply reason? They are just like cattle. Rather, they are further astray from the way. Why are they further astray? Because there is no shame for cattle in being cattle. But there is shame in a human being who's acting like cattle. That's the nature of cattle, to be like cattle. But when you decide to put, as the Quran says, you refuse to apply your reason, that's it. You've sunk. The cattle has not sunk. So that's why they are further astray. They have hearts with which they do not understand. They have eyes with which they do not see. They have ears with which they do not hear. They are like cattle. Rather, they are more astray. it is they who are the heedless. Indeed, the worst of beasts in Allah's sight are the deaf and the dumb who do not apply reason. So deaf and dumb has nothing to do with some sort of physical disability. It's, do you apply reason? Are you using the faculty given to you or not? And the last category, the last group, deep study versus superficial understanding. If religion, as the quotes said, is simply about accepting blindly following, blindly accepting what a holy book tells you, would that holy book tell you that I do not accept you to simply take what I say for granted? Because if the book tells you you have to study me, you have to have a deep understanding and use your mind and not take anything for granted, it's encouraging you, and the probability is a lot greater that if there are any weaknesses, there are any contradictions, there are any issues, you're going to discover them. That can only be the case if that book is so confident of itself that there's absolutely nothing that you can find that would make you not believe in the book, whose entire purpose is for you to believe in it. When the Holy Quran tells people to believe in it, it doesn't accept superficial acceptance. It doesn't accept superficial belief. This is not belief according to the Quran. Do they not contemplate the Quran? It's not reading it and accepting it at face value. This is a deep understanding. أَفَلَا تَدَبُّرْ تَفَكُّرْ. These are not, and even the construction in Arabic, the construction of those, the declination of those roots is basically saying you have to emphasize the exercise of your judgment. The understanding that you have has to be very deep. So it's saying, why are they not acquiring, giving themselves a deep understanding of the Quran? And then you can see the alternative. It's either you have that deep understanding, had it been from someone other than Allah, they would have surely found much discrepancy in it, contradiction. Well, how do you find if there's a contradiction or not? The Holy Quran is telling you, study me. Study every part. Look for that contradiction. Until you are fully convinced that it can only be from one author that is divine. This is an open invitation. Because someone can come back and say the Holy Quran is asking of people to accept it at face value, to follow it blindly. The next verse, do they not contemplate the Quran, or are there locks on their hearts? This may be seen more as a spiritual dimension, but it can also be applied at the epistemological dimension or the interpretation. Why? What is it that is preventing these people from seeing what the Quran is saying? But again, it says contemplate. What's preventing them from contemplating the Quran? So there's a lack of will, but the invitation to look deeply is there. In summary, if we go back to the quotes with which we started. In the first one, we were told those who are fanatics, fans of religion, they are asked to switch off their own minds, to ignore the evidence, and to blindly follow a holy book. If someone doesn't need to believe it, but if someone is aware of what the Quran actually says about knowledge and about the place of reason, can you actually say this quote? You don't need to believe in it. But no one can be objective and be sincere in saying, I know what the Quran says, and then in the same breath say, and the Quran says, follow me blindly. Because as we said, over 500 verses fall in that category of contradicting us. And the second quote, faith is the great excuse to evade the need to think. Well, I think we established clearly that, at least from our perspective, based on our Quranic teachings, faith is nothing but the activity of thinking and thinking deeply. And so if I can finish with, without summarizing all of this, I think it's clear. If I can finish with one thought, it's that it's one thing to say that knowledge and critical thinking are important in Islam. That's one thing. But that's not really what we just read. And so, this is where I would invite you to go back and think more about it. The verses that we read were not saying knowledge and critical thinking and reason are important. They're saying that in Islam, they're necessary. Islam is not Islam without those ingredients. It's the ingredient that makes it Islam. There's something missing if there is no knowledge acquisition and deep thinking. Knowledge acquisition and critical thinking. That is associated with your belief, this system that you call Islam. I'll stop here. I think it was even longer than I was hoping for. And so, if possible, for discussion, first of all, I'd like to know if you consider this to be a relevant or not topic for this kind of setting. Too much detail, not enough. Is it something that you're interested in pursuing further based on the theme that we explained at the beginning? And then, more at a personal level, do you think that this is a theme that has any relevance to you personally, as a person, as an individual? And then, does it have relevance to you as a member of your community? As a member of whichever small communities and minorities the majority of us come from, as a member of Canadian society, as a member of this culture, does it have relevance? Does some or all or part of what we said, does it resonate? Does it make you think about things that you've encountered? Does it reconfirm? Does it contradict what you know, what you thought, or not? So that's all I had. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. Do I answer? Does anyone want to venture? Yeah, you'd like to?
It's just a thought, and it's
Yeah.
in terms of US. Maybe it's an analogy. It's almost like, when they say, like, when you decide to join an army, as an example, whether it's the military, you try and sort of understand what they stand for, what they're fighting against. And once you're in there, and when the military commander, once you've bought into the ideals and the principles, when the person tells you to jump, sometimes it's not why, but at that point it's like, how high should I jump, as an example. But to be able to reach that stage, you obviously have to get a lot of buy-in and be able to sort of accept the ideals and know what the game plan is to some extent.
Sure. Yes?
Sayid told me this before, so if I'm mistaken, let me know. But there's this one marja, I believe, in Iran or Iraq, and he said that the main battle between the West and Islam is that in the West they are slaves of their intellect, while Islam teaches you to be the master of your intellect. Me personally, I don't really quite understand what he means by that, but this is just another concept I would like to throw out there in this general discussion.
Okay, thank you. Yes?
I'd say Islam is all about, it's more of a verb than a noun. So it's not only submission, but it's, as we see in the Quran, when we read it, we see that Allah says, for example, to the Bedouins, of the dwellers of the desert, He tells them, قَالَتِ الْأَعْرَابِ آمَنَّا. If you proclaim that you have believed, but nay, you have not believed, because this is only words, but you're not doing something. You're not actually doing what you're told to be done. So I think Islam is more of the verb than a noun.
Okay. Thank you. Sisters? Any input, any feedback, comments? The question, yes. Please.
I'd like to know how you overcame doubt, how you went from this knowledge of Islam calling you to question it to now being visibly fully convinced of your faith.
So you're asking me personally? Yeah, okay, so I'll come back to that. So regarding this question, very good question. And some of the elements of the answer, they were mentioned, of course, is in that this is an ongoing process. So I wouldn't say that entering into a religion or is as simple, for instance, as coming into an army. And of course, it's just an example to simplify. But this is always an ongoing process. And at any given time, you are supposed to, as a Muslim, be acquiring more knowledge and using your critical thinking. And there is nowhere, this process never stops into becoming a blind submission unless you know that this is the truth. Today, the only truth that we have, the infallible truth that we have, is the Holy Quran for a believer. And the rest is all open for discussion, it's all open for study. There is a percentage of right and wrong. It may be 99% right, and it might be 50% right, and it might be 30% right. And the only way you can determine that is by equipping yourself with knowledge and critical thinking yourself. Otherwise, you are no different in this domain than you are in every other domain in life. So if my garage door is broken, I have the option of learning how to fix it myself or relying on someone else's knowledge and expertise and coming and telling me this is how I fix it. And if there's something wrong with my body and I don't know how to fix it myself, I'm going to have to go to the expert and rely on them and follow them blindly and allow them to fix it. And in this field, it's not going to be different. The call, the intrinsic, the original call in our religion is to try to be that expert for yourself. But if you can't, of course, to the extent that you can't, you're going to rely on someone else like any other field in your life. Right? So I don't know if that makes sense or not, if the examples, the analogies make sense or not, but it's no different than any other field. The initial call is go acquire the knowledge and use your critical thinking and become the expert in this one matter and this one thing that should be the most important to you. And the rest should be secondary. But it's up to you to decide where to put your energy, how much knowledge to acquire, and where you think it's sufficient. So one person will say, I want to know everything, and the other will say, I want to know just enough to get by, and the rest I can rely on someone else. Okay, that's acceptable too. The minimum is quite low. So the door is open, and the religion is inclusive, so that anyone who wants to come in, it's easy to come in. But it doesn't mean that we should accept the minimum and consider that to be what we aspire to, right? Especially when we understand the role that the Quran is describing for knowledge and for critical thinking. Now the second part, how am I convinced? How did I go from doubt to knowledge? I think I gave a part of that answer, which is, to me, it's an ongoing process. I would never claim that today I think that I have some sort of ultimate 100% certitude and truth. I don't think it works like that. If a human being is objective and they're applying their knowledge and their thinking, I think they're always in a constant struggle to see what else can I learn, and is this new information, is this new knowledge, is my critical thinking forcing me to rethink something that I have taken for granted or not? It does not necessarily mean that I'm going to scrap everything I know because there might be a little doubt. What it means is that I have to go do more study because I heard an answer, maybe that answer was not convincing to me. And I think this is the key. And we do that in a lot of aspects in our lives. Unfortunately, I think for the majority of us, we are living our routinely daily lives, and when the religious thought crosses our mind, we may not put in as much energy into it as we may put in when a thought about something else crosses our mind. If I really wanted to buy a house or wanted to buy a car, I think I'd spend a lot of energy, because I think this is a very big purchase. I don't want to make a mistake. I'm going to do all my research. I'm going to ask my friends. I'm going to go to the experts. I'm going to talk to banks. I don't know how many of us do that when we go to our religious stuff. If I have a doubt, do I bother to read a book or two? Or do I think about it maybe for 30 seconds, maybe read about it on Google for 15 minutes and then move on to the next thing? Well, of course, that doubt is going to remain there. It's going to linger, and the next doubt you have is going to be added to it, and that doubt is going to grow. In my case, I think I have an obsessive curiosity, not only about religion, and that may help me in religion. But I don't think that I can claim to have some sort of certitude 100%. I wish that I had something to tell me you are 100% on the right path and that everything you know is absolutely right. I would never claim that.
Well, yeah. It's not necessarily about knowing the absolute truth. It's about going through all of Islam's knowledge and all of Islam's claims through the Quran, through the Sunnah, and through whatever is considered Islamic knowledge. That is finite. I understand that there's an infinite amount of knowledge to be gained, and there's no possible way to go through all of it. But in terms of Islam, I think there is a way to go through all of the knowledge and determine whether or not we accept it. I'd like to know if that's the case for you, how you approach the finite knowledge in Islam.
Okay, so at a personal level, I'll say that initially I had a very strong background in philosophy from a very young age. And so that kind of shaped the way I think about things. My thinking is usually very systemic and very logical. So I cannot look at a religion, no matter what it is, and start by looking, let's say, at a ritual in a religion, as some people do, and say, that ritual, I'm not really convinced of it, therefore the religion is wrong. That's not how it works. The ritual is an application of something, so it's a derivative of something bigger. So that is coming out of a prior belief, a more foundational belief. So if I could say something to anyone who wants to embark on religious studies, I would say start from the beginning. The first questions that you should ask yourself, unless you know for sure that you're a realist, that you believe in the reality that we live in, is to establish what is reality for you or not. Because if you doubt that the world we live in is real or not real, then good luck. Okay? But let's assume that you're a realist. Once you've passed that stage, I would say the most important question you need to answer right away, don't waste any time on anything else, is does God exist or not? Once that's answered, with certainty and conviction, is there a God or not? Because don't waste time with anything else if that's not resolved for you. You need to resolve that. You either have a theistic worldview or you have a materialistic worldview. There's nothing in between. There is either a God, so if you believe in a God, everything, whether you're conscious of it or not, everything you are going to believe in is going to derive from that belief. Because there is a God. The next thing you have to establish once that's determined is what type of God is it? And so you have to spend a little bit of time understanding. Do you believe in a pantheistic God? Is the universe God? Are the laws of nature God? Is it a deistic God? So he exists but he doesn't know that we're there? Or is it a personal God that I can have a personal relationship with? Including, does he care about human beings enough to communicate anything to them or not? And then what type of communication should we expect from that God? Is it a communication that actually gets them to do what he wants or something else? To me, this is the way you build your system. If you do it in this logical order, there's a whole lot of details that can be added. But I think it also helps you to eliminate a lot of things right off the bat very quickly. Which means that you don't necessarily have to spend 30 years studying all the religions of the world. You may actually do it in 2 years. Because it eliminates so much. But it all depends on the turns and the stops that you're going to take along that path. My recommendation is to go from there. And usually this is what's done in lessons of beliefs and lessons of theology, which are the foundation of your religion. Before I study fiqh or laws, before I study the history of a religion, before I have to study what's the ideology or the worldview presented by that religion. What is the God? What is at the center of that religion? Is there a God or not? Is it a personal God or not? What are the attributes? Has he communicated anything or not? What kind of communication is it? Can I have certainty in that communication or not? And then, and only then can I see, okay, so let's look at this communication. What does it actually say? Okay, so that's kind of a high level answer. Inshallah, it helps a little bit. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I would like to just raise a point. I think there is when you have to sleep, it doesn't mean that you don't need evidence. There is no contradiction. I will give the example from the Quran itself. I don't think that someone can think that Musa alayhi salam was not a believer, but he asked to talk to Allah. لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي. He was looking for an evidence. I think it's as a prophet, no one can challenge that Musa wasn't a believer. But لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي. It's normal. Even if you have a taslim for something, you are always looking for evidence, at least to be able to convince others that you are not just like dumb people who can believe anything. It's the first thing. I think the notion of taslim of what? Because there is darajat, there is a level. Something you can find evidence, and you should try to find evidence. But I think when the religion of Fuqaha in general talk about taslim and some evidence. For example, at the end, believing in God is taslim. It's taslim because you don't see it, at least in this life. Believing in the heaven, it is taslim because you will have evidence. You can have a very philosophical argumentation to prove it, but at the end, when you accept that evidence has proven the existence of God without seeing the God himself, like it is at the sleep. I think there is some in as many things, something we should be very careful. Having taslim doesn't mean everything that someone tell you because it is on a book or wrote 300 or 400 because it was said by Sayid or something like that. Okay, it's just take it taslim. No, I think taslim has the level.
Absolutely. It's a very good point. Thank you very much. And this is something that we actually notice in the stories of all the prophets, that they are always aspiring to a higher level of faith, a higher level of belief, and it's usually based on a type of knowledge, a higher type of knowledge than just the acquired, which is with the Prophet Ibrahim when he says, Prophet Musa alayhi salam for what he asks. Absolutely. The second thing, and I didn't want to get into the details of this topic, but the Holy Quran uses the words of Islam and Taslim and the word of Iman in different ways. And so there are different levels of Islam and Iman that are talked about in the Quran. One level is simply saying the Shahada, as we would call it today. So someone entering into Islam at a very superficial level, that can be considered Islam. And this is the verse that you referred to when it says, قَالَتِ الْأَعْرَابُ آمَنَّا قُلْ لَمْ تُؤْمِنُوا وَلَكِنْ قُولُوا أَسْلَمْنَا. When the Arabs have said, we have believed, say, no, you have not believed, you have become Muslims. And when faith actually enters in your hearts, because it's basically saying faith has not yet entered in your heart. You have believed, but for different reasons. You have said, proclaimed words, but for different. Don't say we have believed. This is not belief. Okay, so there are verses in the Quran that talk about Islam and Taslim at a much higher level. In fact, a lot higher than just Iman, because we usually say Iman is the highest level. Well, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam with his son Ismail, it says, فَلَمَّا أَسْلَمَا وَتَلَّهُ لِلْجَبِينِ. When they, let's say, submitted, and he put his forehead on the ground. Okay, this is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam with the sacrifice of his son, Prophet Ismail. This submission is not the submission of the Arabs who have said, we have believed. So, and the Quran is using the same term. So there are, as you said, exactly many, many levels of Islam and Taslim and Iman. And this requires a study on its own and how the Quran uses this terminology. But very good points, brother. Thank you. I know you had said 8 o'clock and I noticed 8, so I'll stop.
Yeah, if do you have any other last questions?
For the sisters, they didn't ask me.
Is there anyone else that want to add something to tonight's program? That's it. Good. Inshallah, maybe.
Wouldn't your argument, also a plain devil's advocate, wouldn't your argument that you made, and I'm sure maybe because of the time was short and whatnot, your argument wasn't as what do you call it? It wasn't a big essay, so it was pretty what do you call it? Compressed.
Yeah.
But would one be right to say that your argument was a weak man fallacy? You used a code from a person, an atheist from a Christian background. Because Christian background, especially if they're familiar with the Calvinist background, Calvinists believe that the realm of logic is different from the realm of faith. So that separation was in there. Some of the Protestants believed in it. But in Islam, it was a different story.
Yes.
So you have people of skeptics or atheists of the Islamic background would have a different perspective on religion. Surush, I can call him atheist, but he's a different type of monotheist.
Yeah.
Kind of person, maybe a little bit of theist, but he would have had a different perspective on Islam, let's say, more of a materialistic, that be more relevant to us than, let's say, Charles, I forgot his name.
Richard Dawkins?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
That's one point. The other point is, wouldn't you agree that even in ulama of Islam, they talked about where does knowledge end, where does logic end, and they've talked about it. And like Spinoza talks about whether we should mix these two realms together. And many ulama of Islam have agreed with him that we shouldn't mix them. And I know that some people even talk against going to philosophy, and they even said that it's forbidden to go to philosophy. And they're not like hooligans or like anything. They're very respected people in their communities who said forbid it, philosophy. And even people who did agree with philosophy, when it comes to analysis of what we call ilm al-kalam, and a lot of Western philosophers who has poached this and poked different holes into the ilm al-kalam and deem it more of a theology than a philosophy. When it comes to that, these ulama that believe in philosophy, they say, let's separate Western philosophy and standards of the West from the East, and let's create this bubble that our arguments make sense in it, but let's not play ball when it's not in our favor. Would that be like that might be a devil's advocate that might be presented?
Yeah. So for the first objection, I kind of partially agree that, I have to, because it's a presentation and there's a rhetoric that goes with a presentation, we're kind of telling a story. So we decided to use as an example Richard Dawkins. But I do not think that it's because Richard Dawkins it had nothing to do with how weak or strong he is or how representative or not
He's
he
the
is.
most famous, technically.
I think his popularity today speaks for itself. Anyone who is kind of active and well aware of what's going on in the Western world knows who Richard Dawkins is a lot more than Abdul Karim Soroush. That's what I think. Okay, so I can do a quick survey here and see how many people have heard about the thought of Abdul Karim Soroush and can talk about it. Raise your hand. Okay, so maybe 1, 2, 3, 4. How many people have heard about Richard Dawkins in general and they know in general who he is and what he believes in? Okay, so it's about 3 times more. Good. So this was the idea. And of course, given the short period of time, I think Abdul Karim Soroush is a very complex author. And so if I want to attack him, it wouldn't be in a lecture like this. It would be going through the actual work, quoting him again and again, and showing where he is right and where he goes wrong. Okay, he's a rationalist or over-rationalist in his way of presenting religion. He has his own twist on Islam and what he considers to be revelation or not revelation. That's a topic on its own. So I think it's a little advanced for what we're trying to do. That's all I'm saying. I don't think anyone should be attacking him unless you think that he's influential. That's all I'm saying for the first thing. The second thing is, I kind of only half agree with what you're saying because I think it's a simplification of the ilm al-kalam to present it in this manner. It has a bad rap. Ilm al-Kalam has often over time been presented as, and Al-Ghazali and Ibn Rushd, usually if you know those two, then you think that's everything there is to know about falsafa and Ilm al-Kalam and the relation between those two. It's a lot more complicated than that. So Al-Ghazali attacks the philosophers because he thinks they're basically non-believers, because they have their own twist on what God is and what creation is and what the afterlife is, which does not match the superficial interpretation of the revelation. Okay? So I'm not saying it is right or wrong. I'm just saying if you read the verses of the Quran, they seem to say, for instance, the afterlife is jismani. You are back in the afterlife with your body. Whereas if you read Al-Kindi and Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina and other philosophers, they seem to be saying that you are only going to be there in spirit and not in body. And the philosophers could not establish the presence of the body in the afterlife, philosophically. So they stop there. Ibn Sina says, I wish I could, the Quran says, and I don't know how to do it. So he stops. He cannot prove it with his philosophical system. Okay? He's honest in the way he presents it. That's an example. And so he says they are kuffar. And the philosophers come back and say the mutakallimin, so Ibn Rushd and others say the mutakallimin are extremely superficial in understanding what the Quran says, and the Quran is not really written for people like them to understand fully. It's written for people like us who meditate deeply. And that's the dynamic, if you want to reduce it and simplify it, between falsafa in the Islamic sense and ilm al-kalam. But it's too cheap to make it that. If you want to really get into ilm al-kalam, and ilm al-kalam is a lot deeper, and there's a lot of philosophy in ilm al-kalam, and there's a lot of ilm al-kalam in falsafa. Okay, and if you read a system like Mullah Sadra, you would not be able to see where which one starts and which one stops. Okay, and I'm not saying he's the best. It's been 400 years that they've been commenting and refuting and. All that to say, I think ilm al-kalam cannot be simply presented as a superficial understanding of whatever is in the scripture taken for granted, and falsafa just a blind reliance on, as maybe you have said, brother, a blind servitude to reason. I think both of them are a little bit more complex than that. And there are scholars now, as you said, there are schools of thought in every major school in Islam who are trying to bring them together, and there are scholars who are trying to keep them separate. Okay? I know there's a huge school right now, very popular, let's say in Iran, called the Tafkikiyin, Madrasa Tafkikiyin, who say there's nothing wrong with falsafa, but it stays in its field, and there's the religious sciences stay in their field. Don't mix them up. These are scriptural, revelational sciences. Do not use those tools here, and do not use those tools there. Okay? And whether they are right or wrong, well, this is what the highest level of our educated scholars are arguing on a daily basis in their classes and in their books. So I think the debate is going to be raging for a while, and I don't think they're going to be sorted right away. I think it's excellent questions that you're raising, but I think they're a little advanced for what we're trying to come to. So maybe one-on-one debate.
Thank you so much, Sayid. Thank you so much, everyone.